Order at 5:35 p.m.
6:35, you're gonna change your watch.
Oh, I didn't change my watch.
Really wrong.
Oh,
Doing, roll call. Kristen Bagley.
Here.
Kristen Knudsen.
Coming.
Ann Dixon.
Here.
Anna Isabella Dos Reyes Cuco.
Here.
David Hall. Dean Kennedy. Everybody's not here. I'm here. Kimberly Shockley.
Here.
Voting members, non-voting members. Amy Hanslow.
Here.
Mario Carino. Russ Hill. Black Howard. Here. Town manager still with Bob Roy.
Bob, I did send him an invite.
Robert Sabetti.
Nope.
Gerald Sands.
Yep.
And Mr. Coward, you do the emergency evacuation.
Yes, there's a few different ways to get out of this room. You can go back out the way you came in, go down the hall and exit at the end of the hall. You can also exit through this door behind you, the marked exit, go through that office, and there's a door that goes straight outside.
And I believe the minutes of February 15th were sent out to the group. Is there a motion to approve the minutes of February?
I'll make a motion.
Second,
Second.
any discussion on the minutes of February 15th? Seeing none, all in favor,
Aye.
any opposed? Ayes have it. Passes. All right, next on the agenda is the financial updates for discussion. Who wants to-
Yeah, so I can get started here, and the town's bond council is here. I don't know if you want to introduce yourself.
I'm David Ferrara, the council appointed me as the town's bond council.
And so we had a meeting with David and a few other town officials to talk about the project, the financing of the project, and there's a few different questions that were raised during that meeting. And we decided that we probably needed to have a meeting with the town council so that we could go through the project and go through the scope of the project, the plan that we developed and the finances that go with it. So what the town council has decided is, on March 21st, we already have a joint meeting scheduled with the town council to go over the school department budget. And after that meeting is after that portion of the meeting, there'll be a joint session with bond council to go over some of the items that were raised at that smaller meeting, and then maybe kind of go over some possible solutions and things that need to be discussed. So I'm not presenting any financials today, neither is Harold, because we felt that that meeting with bond council and with the town council should happen first before we. Any questions about that?
Did you know the meeting was on the 21st?
I did.
Okay. Did you finalize last night?
If no questions, has anything to add, we can move on to the next agenda item, which is referendum update.
So what I did is, and this came out of something that I had already discussed with Phil, but also came out of the meeting with that small group of people that, we need to kind of get this team back up to speed with two different topics. One being the referendum date and the timeline that leads up to that date, and what has to happen and when. And then, which is the next agenda item, which would be the project schedule and the referendum and the time, the timetable of that schedule. So Phil had put together a presentation. Does it capture both things in one presentation, or is it?
Pretty much, yeah. Yeah, I would say everything is in the presentation.
Yeah, so Phil kind of helped work on that. I will say, if folks here are not aware that right now we're pointing towards October 3rd as being the date for the referendum. If everything goes through, that's the date it would happen. And so it's a regular, I don't know what the general law is, but it's the kind of election where they have polling places and there's early voting and there's all the different things that you would have in a regular general election. So there's a timeline and time schedule that's for that. So what I'm gonna do is I'll put up the presentation, I'll share it, and then we can kind of walk through it, and we can do like we usually do, if you have questions, we can answer questions and kind of go there.
If everybody's okay, maybe I'll just sit here.
Oh, yeah.
All right, so, thank you, Don. It's a very brief agenda, but there's a lot of information on here that we can have discussions about. Mr. Ferrer, there may be some new information on here that certainly, may be of interest to you and the whole group. So regarding the RIDE Stage 2, obviously it was submitted, but we have not received any comments yet. When we do, they're typically sent to the superintendent, and you get them forward to us, and they would like us to respond within 10 days to their comments. The other thing we'll talk about is this schedule of activities and tentative timelines, and this is all really draft. This is really meant for discussion purposes here. So I think one of the things that we need to talk about first, and underneath that, I think it said forecast of activities. There you go. So there are bond and legislative requirements and activities. They're going to come up at this workshop with town council and bond council. We'll be there to answer any questions and have some discussions. A question may be, how is Coventry qualifying for the incentives by showing a project start before the end of the year? I know there's legislation right now that may extend that to June. But how are we going to do that if it remained the end of this year, or how we do that? And if it goes to June, the date of the workshop is March 21st. So I will be there to answer these questions and any other questions that come up. Just to remind everybody of sort of where we are, this is a very high level explanation of what the costs are. This is a $100 million campaign and how the town is projecting to match that $100 million expenditure. There is an $80 million bond. We have the facility equity grant state share. Remember, there are two pay-go pieces here, each at $8 million. And let's not forget that sometime before the end of this whole campaign, right now, there's an $800,000 delta that we're looking to either to make up from bonuses or from any property sales. So this is something that the town council and everybody will want to continue to track as we go forward. And questions like this will probably come up during our workshop.
Want to just talk about the values of these properties. We had them all evaluated and appraised, and these were the market values that we got at the last meeting. So any one of these properties will cover that delta.
Keeping in mind, those projects won't be vacated until a new building is constructed, obviously, so. This again was just, wow, computer,
I don't know. Why
that's all right,
Back it down.
this was just, a
Back it
summary.
down. Put it on the top.
Okay, I think I talked myself before, when I send you something, I should send you a PDF, because I send you the PowerPoint, it does some wacky things, but you recall, this is how we break down on 100 million and where those values are at each school. At the end of the deck, I have what those projects are. We need to go back and sort of refresh everybody's memory. Next slide. So this was the schedule that we included in our stage 2 submission. And one of the questions that came up was, how are we going to start the project at the time that we need to? And Mario reiterated this again that the start of a project is when we have, the team on board. So if we bring our construction manager on board, our OPM, design team is already on board, that effectively has started the project. So that's how you're gonna meet the project start before the end of this year. There are a number of communities in this same position. South Kingstown, East Greenwich, and Coventry, and there are probably others that are on the same timeline. In fact, South Kingstown's bond vote is going to also be October 3rd. So
Did you say October 3rd or November 3rd for ours? I
October
thought it was October, but okay.
So green highlights the design and documentation phase, blue would be the finalization of any pre-construction activities. And then you're starting construction through that gray bar, so that we're done with the new school, obviously before the September 2027 school year. And the work at Coventry High School is a little bit longer because of its sprinkler system work. And then the smaller groups of work that we want to start in the summer, but will definitely extend into the school year. So when we have the OPM and the CM on board, assuming voter approval, all of these schedules will then become their responsibility to manage and put together.
I'd like to clarify that. if I
Yeah.
may. He said in his email that the project date, the statute requires you to commence construction by 12/31/23.
Yes,
The bills extending it have been held in committee. They haven't passed by the House and Senate Finance. He said, quote, and I hope I'm not misquoting, what the date of the project of the contract. Now, I was hoping he was here to clarify whether that was the date of the contract for construction or the date of some other contract. Obviously, the design team has been under contract for quite some time because we wouldn't be here. So, and if that is incorporated in any RIDE regulation, or is that merely an interpretation, which is not binding on RIDE, given the statute says commence construction. So I'm not quite
convinced,
convinced.
that's fine. And Mario is really the only person that really can convince you of
I
that.
understand that.
It's our
Well,
interpretation.
I understand if it's more than someone, first of all, it would have to be in writing. And more so than in an email. It would have to be, with. When we accept an interpretation from one official, when that official is no longer there, we recently experienced that, not with RIDE or someone else. By some other state department that, untoward things happen. It's a lot of, it's 20% of your bond expenses that are at risk here. So, when you prepare for the referendum, you're required by state law to disclose to the voters the cost of the project and certain other things. When you sell the bonds, you're going to be disclosing in a security offering what the cost of the project is, the expected state aid, and things like that. That, when the superintendent and the council president and anyone they rely on is asked to make representations in the sale of a bond to the public. If those representations were made in disregard of the facts, that would be problematical from a security point of view.
So yeah, it's 100% understood. So I reached out to Mario, he's gonna be there on the 21st. So he'll be able to address that in person, but we'll also make sure that we get something in writing as well, because my understanding of my conversations with him in the past, even before you raised this question, has been the practice throughout the entire school construction boom that we're experiencing, that if you had people in place by that date, the deadline date, that did not mean you had to have the project completely like
Shovel in the ground.
Shovels in the ground.
So shovel in the ground did not equal commence of construction.
Yep, so, but I can circle back with him, because I think that's the important thing here. You wanted to, and I agree with you, ensure that that 20% is not in jeopardy in any way, shape, or form.
Well, it's perfectly permissible to proceed knowing that you're not getting it,
the
but,
town would never
but
do
you're
that.
not going, that changes your finances by a factor of 20%.
Yeah. So this is our second bite at the apple. I don't know if you knew that. So we actually presented a project last year. It was a middle school project. Went through this whole same thing, all the way to the point where we were ready to ask the town for a vote for a referendum. And it did not pass because we had a new town council, we had a new town manager, a new finance director. They had a lot of questions and it fell apart. When this group came back together and the town council was part of what got this rolling. It didn't just come from the school department side. The town council was excited to kind of revisit this topic. Mario had presented to them at a meeting. One of the things that was made pretty clear was that the only way we're gonna be able to move forward with a project like that, like this, is to maximize all these incentives so that the burden on the taxpayers is not as significant as our last project. And so this project is coming back right now with 69.2% reimbursement, whatever it is. Our last one, I think, was 57.8. And so this one has a better reimbursement, but if that were to go down by 20%, I'm sure that would change the town council's opinion on moving forward with the project significantly. Right.
Sure, next slide. So, following a productive resolution to the workshop. And everyone is on board with moving forward. There's a couple things that you'll want to do. There's the selection of the OPM and the CM at risk in advance of the bond vote. And the advantage is to have this early selection done is that selection process is potentially easier during the late summer, early fall before you get into school. But certainly upon a successful bond vote on October 3rd, that would allow for the immediate start to align with the RIDE regulations of commencing construction. There's a couple more slides to this, so go on to the next one. So I would suggest a concurrent selection of the OPM and the CM. It's a good time to define what their roles and responsibilities are. Now, you're not likely going to have any funding available for OPM and CM activities. And the selection is going to be contingent upon voter approval. So there's really no expectation for the OPM or the CM to perform any tasks prior to your successful bond vote. And even then, once you have that bond vote, the money doesn't just magically appear, right? So that all needs to be explained to them during the selection process. But this is a typical track for communities in advance of having a bond vote to get everybody lined up. Next slide.
And before you move on, we actually, those of you that were part of the last project, we had brought on somebody. They started attending our meetings near the end. Didn't really provide a whole lot of input, but they were at the meetings, kind of listening to what we were discussing and collecting information. So that if we had gotten to the next point, which would have been moving towards the referendum with a positive outcome for the town council, then they would be able to.
Did we have a CM last time though?
But we had the
OPM.
Okay.
Okay.
And when do you recommend this?
So late summer,
Okay.
early fall, before the bond vote.
with the OPM, because we had like a creative agreement with them, it was like almost like a per diem kind of thing, it wasn't a long-term contract, it was sort of like as you go.
So we're already under contract for stage 2 to take you through the bond vote. So we will assist you with drafting any RFP or scheduling activities for this OPM and CM. Certainly, Mario has access to many RFPs for the same services that you could use. One thing you will want to do is discuss a selection committee, whether it's going to be the entire school building committee or a smaller group. We will only advise, we're not going to participate in any selection. But keep in mind that when you have these selections, there's both usually a written and an oral component to it. You'll want those people to be consistent between both pieces and participate in both. So some people do the entire group. That gets maybe a little unmanageable. Some use a smaller group for selection. that'll be something for this committee to decide over the next several months.
Didn't, quick question, when we chose you, didn't the town choose, do that, or? No, we did actually go through it,
Voted you-
yeah, process,
and they
And
approved
you,
it.
you,
and then
your
negotiation
selection
was with
committee,
the town.
yeah, your selection committee could have members of town council, members of the school committee,
Okay.
members of school building. That's all for you all to discuss on how you want to do that. One of the other things to start thinking now is what your community engagement and outreach will be. A part of this is going to be getting the town council to be on board, probably following this workshop, to endorse a bond of $80 million publicly. I know the chair has talked about having a PR component, and I think there's some headway being made on that. Obviously, you'll want to have a kickoff meeting with this PR component. We can certainly offer support and content. I think the next slide has some scheduling components to it.
Yeah, just to piggyback on what you said, Phil. So, what I don't want to have happen personally, but I also think it's a bad look if we start engaging our teachers and the community before the town council is committed that we're gonna go to a referendum, because that's what happened last time. Not to rehash last time over and over again, but we started the marketing process, we started engaging teachers, we created handouts, we were visiting public events, passing out flyers. We were beginning, I'm not gonna say it was stellar, but we began the marketing process. And when it didn't pass, we had to stop that process, which left a lot of people confused and asking questions. I still have people who say to me to this day, so what's going on with that middle school project? They don't understand what happened. And so what I don't want to have happen is we start thinking about the vision of this new school and start building out where we want to go with this project before the town council is committed to that, because I don't want to be in the same boat.
When is that vote? Is that gonna be on the next slide?
So, no, it's not. Well,
Do we
go to the
have
next slide and see. So in terms of sequence, I don't specifically address that, but if we look at this overall, the first thing we want to do is to conclude any legislative action that needs to be done with bond council and town council approval, et cetera. After that is cleared, engage this PR component. And I think it should start with sort of an announcement, right? And that would be sometime before the end of the school year for the students, the parents, and staff. Then you maintain some low-level, consistent messaging through the summer, and then you aggressively ramp up at this, at the start of back to school. So if you want to have an announcement before the end of the year, this town council endorsement would want to be after the workshop and any legislative action. But obviously before the end of the school year.
And if I remember correctly from a previous meeting, Mario said, and I think he referenced another community, it may have been Johnson, but I'm not sure, that they took that vote to go to referendum early in the process. It wasn't, built specifically into the referendum schedule. They took the vote fairly early in the process because they wanted to kind of clear that hurdle, which allows them to then move towards marketing towards the referendum.
So I'll give you an example. Last month, South Kingstown Town Council voted to approve bonding up to 125 million. Now, they're on the same schedule you guys are, so they have that out of the way. They're working with their bond council now, doing any legislative action that they need to wrap up. And they will be following a similar pattern. Big announcement before the end of the school year, some low-level messaging through the summer, and then ramp it up at back to school.
Maybe I should spell out exactly what needs to happen. I don't care where you do your PR campaign.
Right, I don't.
So you're gonna have a workshop
Yeah.
with the council on March 21st.
Yeah.
At that time, the town's financial advisor will be showing the bond payment schedules under these various scenarios. In other words, the impact in the budget, the impact on the tax rate, and some variables about the money. What needs to happen from a legal point of view is the council needs to approve a bond act presumably it would not be right at that meeting on the 21st. Submit that bond act, which I will prepare, that it is prepared, but I don't know finally what you want, what the council wishes, because I acted the instruction of the council. Okay, so, that will be submitted by me to legislative council at the State House. Who's that? Those are the people that put the acts together for the legislature to be introduced. But your delegation, meaning your representatives and senators, have to take a copy of that physically and ask that it be introduced simultaneously. Of course, I'm sending it in Word, they're giving it in hard copy. That's just the way it happens. That those bills will be introduced normally in the Senate and in the House. They will be referred by the Speaker and the Senate President to the appropriate committee in each house. That in Senate Finance will get one of them. And I presume, I think, I'm pretty sure if we go to Senate Finance, but that's up to you. And they will consider that bond act for Coventry for 80 million. But it will tend not to pass the committee until RIDE has approved it. Because once the legislature approves you, you're approved for your minimum guarantee, roughly 40%. I don't hold me to any specific number. But there is a long list of each city and town with a number, and I think you're at 40.
42.
40, okay. So, so RIDE will have to consider your plan. At that point, somewhere between before the legislature wraps up, the Senate committee has to pass the Senate bill, the House bill, they change them around before the legislature adjourns. It has to be signed by the governor or allowed to become law. So perhaps July 4th, you know whether you're good or there's a problem. Usually, if it gets that far, there isn't a problem.
Yeah.
But so you will have then approximately 3 months, correct? Yep, 3 months to before the referendum. You will have to, if you wish, if the council wishes, the referendum will be a hard date, October 4th. No ifs,
October 3rd.
no ands, no, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
3rd, no ifs, no ands, no buts. That could be in the act, so it will just proceed. In the meantime, the Board of Canvassers will have to produce an ad showing the cost of the project, the bond debt and other things. Then you, at that point, you would want to coordinate your campaigns, whatever you want to do or not, as the case may be. But I just wanted to make it clear that it's not that this is things that what I just said has to happen. It's not, in any way, shape, or form,
But the vote.
avoidable.
Here's a question, the vote, from the town council to go to referendum, to allow a referendum to happen.
No, that's not exactly, the town council asked the legislation to pass the bond act. That says, town of Coventry, we issue bonds, it's about 7 pages, and it shall be held with the question phrases thus and such on October 3rd.
So
Yeah,
that-
and we're asking the legislature to
Right.
let us.
To order it to be done.
put-
Right, so here's my question, is there any other vote that needs to happen?
Well, there could be, if you said that you weren't sure of the referendum, many bond acts say. This question is phrased out, shall the town of Coventry be authorized to issue 80 million in bonds? On, et cetera, can happen on any date the town council chooses after 60 days of passage. So they then at some later point, the council could choose, oh, well, October's not good, November. You only can have it these days on the
It's pretty
the
limited.
first two, that particular, the first Tuesday after the first Monday, or that formula that gets you to October 3rd. I can't repeat it. I can't remember it off the top of my head. So no, the answer is no. If everything's tied down
Yeah, our vote
when you
will tie
send
that.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's easier.
And that vote that you're talking about, Kim.
Yep.
That you just laid out, is that first vote that needs to happen to send it to the.
Legislature.
Absolutely. The
Yeah.
legislature will not consider a
Right,
bond
so
act.
I look at that as being the green light to then begin.
Yeah.
Our marketing and engaging people, because that means the school, the town council has committed. Moving this along.
Yes.
Even if, stuff happens in the general assembly, you committed that this project.
Yeah, the
Because I
town
think that's
council.
where we stopped last time.
Yeah.
That was the vote that stopped us. It didn't go past that. So I guess from my perspective, the reason why I brought this up is I'd like to, once that vote happens in the affirmative, I think that gives us a lot of time to now start ramping up the messaging and think about what our strategies could be.
And hopefully a lot of questions get answered on the 21st, because I think that's the largest thing
Yeah.
for the current council is
Yeah.
how do we tax for it, affordability?
Thank you, that was a good explanation. I think that probably helps a lot of people.
But there's a lot, but as I said, it's not, I can show you all sorts of ways it's been done elsewhere. North Kingstown and Narragansett and Jamestown, but the ad is not to be taken lightly for the voters, and that generally is done. I don't know when Labor Day is, but if you would want to have that published in the way all your voter publications are done. I don't know how that's done offhand, Coventry.
Yeah.
But it has, it's some towns, we use, if you have a paper that you have your legal ads in, at least that. Now, it could do, that's the legal ad. What you produce outside of that, I'm not taking any responsibility for
Yeah, yeah.
whatsoever.
And if we do a good
The
job,
literature or whatever, I don't,
yeah, I
it
get
doesn't
that.
involve me.
But if we do a good job with PR campaigning and pushing the project in the community, by the time that ad comes out, everybody should know what it is.
Mhm.
Right, there should be no like, hey, what's this all about? We do a good job.
I don't know if there's the next line. Okay, so in terms, for more discussion on sequencing the OPM and the CM selection, maybe the end of July, beginning of August, the current selection, it's probably like a 6-week process. To do that, should be qualifications based, and of course, any award is contingent upon voter approval of the bond if we make it that far.
There's one caveat after that. You, I'm not particularly sure of your charter, but most of the charters, you would have to have a vote of the council after the referendum to issue enough bonds at least to pay for those 2 contracts.
The things we've already committed to.
Well, no, I
Yeah.
mean, this, whatever it is to get the project off the ground.
Would
Whether
the
some towns,
pay go to?
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. Would the PAYGO have anything to do with it? Because that would be coming straight from the state, wouldn't it?
PAYGO only. PAYGO is taken off the top of your aid. Okay, so if you had, if you have 69, let's just say you have, let's use even number. If you have 70% reimbursement on an $80 million bond. Of 70% of.
But that's the point of PAYGO is that they give it to us up front so that we. That
We
they,
get started.
we get
Before-
started without having. I'm wondering-
I haven't seen them actually give a town that you're going to. For a town council to award a contract, you have to have money appropriated. To it. Money doesn't necessarily have to exist. By issuing a bond, I'm sorry, by authorizing a bond, it's sufficient. I'm just mentioning, there's something that legally has to be done
Okay.
by the council after
Gotcha.
the.
I think.
I don't think you're gonna get a check on your PAYGO the
Yeah.
next morning,
Yeah,
okay?
Oh, no,
Just so
no,
you
no,
know.
no, no.
Just,
No, but it comes in, most of the people that deal with the PAYGO understand that it is it does come from the state, doesn't it, Phil, or?
Yeah, we're working at Portsmouth, and before they sold their bonds, our work was paid for by their PAYGO.
Right.
Case we would submit an invoice, they would submit it to RIDE, and then
Ride
would
was,
pay
ride would pay it.
their portion.
okay, I'm not aware of that. I think the town
But you're right, the town has to
pays.
approve any.
Yeah, oh,
contract.
yeah,
It's
Town
got-
Town has
pay,
to-
I think the town pays and then they get the money back, to be honest, but I've seen pay go. It's not like they pay your invoice. And if they do, then it's, the process has changed from.
Yeah, no, that's, you do get a check from
Yeah,
RIDE
yeah.
Okay.
for their
They-
section. and
they-
then-
Don't they do it through Ryback?
I don't know, but that's
Yeah.
the actual check, but I know it comes from RIDE, so
Right.
then, and then they.
Ryback only happens after the bond, when you issue bonds.
Yeah, but they have a special, they have a special arrangement with Ryback that PayGo goes through as long as everything is in order, so that.
So there's no involvement of Ryback before you go to bonds. Bonds means permanent financing. The financial
No, I
advisor's
understand that.
plan is to issue notes, temporary notes pending the bonds, because you don't get full reimbursement until the project is completed at the following fiscal year.
Yeah.
So there's a timing disconnect, which the town's financial advisor, PFM, will explain. That's in his financial presentation. So I just, the cash flow is an important issue if the town doesn't have sufficient fund balance, cash in bank. Most of my clients, that having to fund something is not an issue, okay? So in Narragansett, there's a 12% fund, 21% fund balance. They have the cash sitting, so they're able to front monies. So if the town's finance, the Coventry is quite like that, then they will, that'll have to be looked into. But that is not something that I get involved in. I mean, I'm aware of, but I'm not gonna count your money, okay?
Is Steve Mascheroni gonna be at this?
Yes.
21st meeting?
It's supposed to be, yes.
Okay. I know I was on a call with him, interim town manager and Hillary. They had asked if I could project what some of those early monthly expenses would be, a successful bond vote if people are on board, and stuff like
Yeah,
that.
it's kind of like taking out a line of credit and then, put it into permanent financing. And they do that for all sorts of reasons. Cranston Cranston hasn't even issued their bonds yet, and the project's almost, one of the major projects is almost done. They've had 2 years of notes, 1-year notes. Unfortunately, that's become extremely difficult in this a bond market environment. When they first did it, we issued notes for for like 1% for a year. That's not going to happen now. That changes the whole calculus of the way things have been done really for 10 or 20 years. We haven't had notes, 1-year notes at 5% or anything like that. I'm not saying yours is going to be, but they're not going to be 1%.
Okay,
This is all just material I presented before, I just had it at the back of the deck. So we don't need to go through this if you don't want to.
yeah, it's just the projects.
Yep.
The school committee has signed the MOA for the initiative, the equity initiative, and it's not on here, but also. They also signed it on the arts initiative. So all that, this is just the projects.
Yep.
Could I get copies of the memorandum of agreement to provide to the financial advisor?
I have electronically.
Yeah, that'd be great.
So those, just to kind of explain, and you probably already know this already, stop me. So while we were building out this project, RIDE had a number of grants that we were able to get with them. The equity initiative grant is structured sort of the way a school construction project is structured, where the community has to contribute part of the funding and then the rest RIDE pays for. So we have over $5 million available, and RIDE share is one of two different numbers. One number, I don't have it right in front of me, it's just over $2 million. But if you use a minority business, and I'm not sure if women business was included in there, you get a 50% kicker, and it brings your reimbursement up, so that right portion goes up. So we baked into this bond, our share of the grant, and the rest of the money is coming from, right? And then the other one was an arts initiative one, and then we had a furniture one. Those are just ours. We don't have to worry about paying a portion of those are just. So we've kind of looked at some of those opportunities to help some of the work at the high school, some of the other places that, you know, we're not getting as much as the other schools. So, yeah, I can get you.
Any other questions or comments regarding projects?
Yeah, it's just public comment and journey. We left this relatively tight because we knew that this 21st meeting was pretty important. And, you know, I anticipated this meeting being relatively short because I'm hoping that, you know, if you're not already attending this 21st meeting, if you can attend it, and if you can't, you can definitely participate via Zoom. But I think it's important to be aware of that conversation, because I think a lot of what happens and is discussed there is an impact the rest of our path.
Just, you know, we do allow public comment through Zoom too, so if you know anyone who wants to be on and can't be there, you're a member of the attending public. And I'd also like to say thank you to the finance people. I feel like with the last project, this committee was doing a lot of this work, and it's much better to have experts working on it than.
Great.
Curious, at the 21st, will there be like, what the projected tax burden would be on the median house price in Coventry? Will somebody have that information?
Steve Mastroianni?
No, I'm just wondering if, like, will there be a estimated number of what the tax increase will be if my house assesses at blank?
Steve and I worked on the last one, you know, the preliminary ones that we were working on. I had given him that and he said he liked that, so he was gonna carry that on. I don't know.
Reach out to him.
I can reach out as long as the town's okay with me reaching out.
Yeah, and you know, keep our interim finance director involved as well.
No, I'll go straight to Robert first.
Perfect. Yeah, because I think having those numbers is really important to the council.
The spending schedule in this environment is extremely. It didn't matter when it was 1%. It does matter now, because, you know, essentially if you're unable to bond and you have to use notes, the inverted yield curve, if you've all heard about it, means that 1 year, a 1 year note is going to cost you more than percent than a 30-year bond. So, and you won't get full reimbursement until you bond. So you're caught between, to some extent, between a rock and a hard place. So it's not the projections will be completely based on the spending schedule. Spending means actual spending. You don't have to pay the contract or whatever. So I just want to question well about that. It's not as flexible as it used to be. You've got the inverted yield curve, and the market turmoil isn't making your job any easier. When it was 1% free money, it didn't really matter. So you'll have to cover that interest before the bonds on the notes. So if we borrow 10 million, and we have to, for 1 year, just to start doing things on a note for 5%, that's 500,000. You're going to either have to take that off the top of the bond, being called capitalizing interest, or pay it out of the town budget, or some other way to budget for it. So it's like, so Cranston, 1%, so they only had to find, you know, 100,000. It's a huge, the project, the problem is magnified.
Have you heard or experienced anything to do with selling bonds and the success people have had. Mario's talked about a few communities that bonded, bond passed, then they quickly sold the bond and had a pretty good sized return that they were able to put back to the project.
Because of the increasing
The
interest
bond
rates,
premium.
yeah.
The bond
Yeah.
rate.
Well. It's funny you should mention that. Bond premium just means that, so let me explain to you what bond premium is. If the voters approve 80 million of bonds. And, first of all, going forward in the current environment, there's no assurances of anything. But in last year, you would, the rate people expected on a bond was 3% or less. So if they issued a bond with a coupon rate of 5%, people would give you more than 80 million for the bonds. I realize it's a really tough concept because if you don't trade bonds, that's not how your mortgage works.
Yeah.
But let me just ask you, there's a mortgage on your house for 100,000 that and I'm sorry, a mortgage on somebody's house for 100,000 and it pays 1%. I'm sorry, 5%. You might buy that mortgage for 100,000. But if for some reason that mortgage is paying as an interest rate of 10%, wouldn't you like that one better? Because your payment the lender will get more. So might pay more than 100,000. I'm not suggesting that you ever do that with a mortgage because mortgage can be paid off. A bond can't be paid off less than 10 years. That's a whole nother subject. But anyway, it's a way to really artificially increase the amount of bonds proceeds.
Yeah.
That is forbidden by law in Massachusetts. And I think that is one of the subjects I want to address with the council.
Yeah, and I'm glad you.
Because I don't feel comfortable signing a bond opinion saying the bonds are valid and have voter approval if you're going to issue 80 million of bonds with a 7% interest rate and get 150 million of proceeds. Because your voters only approved 80 million of projects or 80 million of bonds, thinking they're only going to spend 80 million. So it has some, they've been doing that, but they're not against the hard limit in Johnston.
Yeah.
Johnston,
was one of the-
Johnston, even with doing all that, Johnston's 50 million short. So. Are you prepared to address the increase in construction costs from the estimates at the 21st?
So RIDE is holding firm what they consider their reimbursement rate, like for a new school. It's, for this school, it's, don't hold me to the numbers, $529 a square foot or something like that. We know it's more than that, right? So what that means is we're gonna end up constructing less square footage. And that has been the path forward on a number of projects in a number of communities. So addressing cost escalation means that we have to be rigorous in the design of the building, build the square footage that satisfies the program, but is also recognizing the construction costs. I'll just make a number. If RIDE says that you should be able to build 150,000 square feet at $529 a square foot, it's not going to happen. You'll end up building about like 100,000 square feet because it's going to cost you $675 a square foot. So we're doing that in Providence. We're doing that in a number of communities. We back into the square footage and the budget.
Are they reimburse you the number per student or per square foot? So if you reduce the footprint of the building, you're going to get less money in reimbursement.
So, as we go, you'll see in the RIDE stage too, we'll see what kind of comments they come back with, but we have the enrollment. Then the enrollment is allowed to be projected 5 years. And they give you a certain amount of square footage for that enrollment. And then they give you the dollar amount for that square footage. The MOA that you get is going to have Coventry Elementary, and it's going to have a dollar amount. And that's it. Then we've been charged with maximizing as much building as we can, that dollar amount. But Mario can speak to that next week
Yep.
as well.
Got three topics.
Public comments, any members of the public here want to say anything? And then, entertain a motion to adjourn at 7:25.
I make a motion to adjourn at 7:25 PM.
Second,
Second.
all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Let's have it.